Admin, are we live?
Yes, yes.
Good morning, our viewers. Welcome to the Council for Strategic Affairs monthly distinguished lecture. My name is Dr. Adityanji, and I am the president of the Council for Strategic Affairs. Let me start my PowerPoint. I hope you can see the logo of the Council for Strategic Affairs. And those of you who registered using our flyer probably saw this flyer. So today is Saturday, May 23rd, 2026. It is approximately 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time in United States and 7:30 p.m. in New Delhi. Our distinguished speaker today is Lieutenant General Kamal Davar, and he is going to give us a lecture on managing the emerging geopolitical churnings. This shows you the entire world on fire, just a metaphorical picture. Little bit about Council for Strategic Affairs. CSA imparts education in the field of international relations. We foster discussion, dialogue, and debate on geopolitical issues. CSA encourages strategic studies in general to raise the level of awareness. The Council condemns terrorism in all its forms worldwide. CSA aims to contribute towards world peace and prosperity. Council also promotes people-to-people contact and track-to diplomacy. We encourage you to subscribe, like, and share the CSA YouTube channel. For our viewers based in United States, we are registered as a 501c3 organization with the IRS in US. Please support and donate to CSA. The link is there on the website. We do a monthly roundtable discussion on second Saturday of each month, and then a monthly guest lecture by a domain expert on fourth Saturday of each month, just like we are having. We have a fellowship training program for college students, and we have two fellows currently, Rohit and Shubhi, who will be joining us. So please subscribe, like, and share our YouTube channel. Again, we are registered as a 501c3 organization. And this is the picture of our distinguished speaker today from his X profile, but you'll be seeing him shortly. Lieutenant General Kamal Davar is one of India's leading military experts. He's a veteran of both 1965 and 1971 wars, and he was wounded in action. He has been in Indian military training team in Iraq. He commanded an armored brigade in the Ladakh sector. He also served as Director General of the Mechanized Forces. He was specially selected to be the first Director General of India's Defense Intelligence Agency. He has participated in track-to diplomacy and is very widely traveled and a prolific author. He is currently associated with a number of think tanks and is a very sought-after speaker on strategic affairs. And keeping in view the topic we have today and the fluid international and geopolitical situation that we are facing, he is the most suitable and most scholarly person to speak on this game of chess that is going on. So a little bit about the topic. I usually don't want to say more. We are living in a world that no longer follows the rules-based order that characterized the geopolitics after World War II. The old geopolitical equations are no longer valid. Powerful nations are carving their spheres of influence in their backyard again. Territorial acquisition, having the client states under subjugation is the new norm again. Geoeconomics is being used to rationalize aggression against sovereign nations. So that's the situation we are facing. And generally, everyone likes to portray cooperation by carrying the burden of the entire earth, but earth is being burnt now. So that's the situation we have. Before I hand over the platform to General Davar, some housekeeping rules. Please stay muted to avoid noise interference. Please change your cell phone setting to vibration mode. Please don't try to interrupt our esteemed speaker. Only those members of the audience who identify themselves openly will be allowed to ask questions, no anonymous questioners. All questions are moderated through the chat room. Send your questions there, but be very precise in asking a question. Don't send lengthy comments in the form of a monologue. This event is being live streamed also on YouTube. We are recording it and it'll be available on our YouTube channel as well as on our website. Please subscribe, like, and share the CSA YouTube channel. And again, we are registered as a 501c3 organization in the US. This is a very, very famous saying. Ashwam naiv gajam naiv naivam vyaghram naiv cha ajaputram balim dadhatu devo durvala ghataka. This Subhashitam aptly describes the geopolitical situation we are facing today. Not the horse, not the elephant, not the tiger, but only the lamb is sacrificed in a ritual. Gods also do not protect the weak. So without further ado, it's my honor and distinct pleasure to give the platform to our honorable speaker, Lieutenant General Kamal Davar. Sir, the platform is yours. Kindly.
Thank you very much. My thanks to the Council of Strategic Affairs, United States, and Dr. Adit Chanji for the invite to share my thoughts on the subject of managing the emerging geopolitical churning. Dr. Saab, thank you very much for all the kind words you've spoken about me. I don't know whether I deserve them. The world is unquestionably at war with itself, and today stands at an inflection point of existence and its road ahead. Never since the end of World War II in 1945 has the world witnessed, since the past 5 years or so, an alarming increase in both the kinetic and non-kinetic variety of conflicts. As if the 2 years of an apocalyptic period was not enough for the world, that is between 2020 to 2022, when millions all over the world perished owing to the disastrous COVID-19 pandemic, which also crippled many economies of the world. In very recent times, out of the blue, I'm saying out of the blue, unwarranted and avoidable serious kinetic conflicts have emerged. Meanwhile, regrettably, the previous ones continue to rage on with undying ferocity. Now, the Israeli-Hamas armed altercation in Gaza since October 2024, resulting in nearly the entire Gaza Strip being devastated with over 75,000 fatalities. The Russian invasion of Eastern Ukraine since February 2022, with the war hotting up once again. The persisting Israel, Hezbollah, and Hamas problems, the decades-old China-Taiwan quest for their political future and status, the continuing on-off Afghanistan-Pakistan border skirmishes and their artillery duels, the Myanmar civil war, besides internal conflicts in many parts of the world, including in the African continent, continue. India's own launching of Operation Sindoor in May last year in retaliation to Pakistan's terror strike against innocent, unarmed terrorists in Pahalgam is also of operational significance. Now, the above-mentioned conflicts have all paled into relative insignificance with a full breakout of the current West Asian conflagration since end February this year. Now, the world on 27th February 2026, with all its tensions and problems, underwent a cataclysmic change the next day, that is on 28th February, when, despite ongoing negotiations, the Israel-US combined launched a massive attack with missiles and drones and jet aircraft on 28 February against Iran. That this war was gradually assuming the contours of a world war, if not halted shortly, was well on the cards, and it is still well on the cards. That this conflict in the Middle East has plunged the world into an unprecedented and alarming energy crisis will be stating or underplaying the obvious. Now, the flip flop of the US and Israel combines overall strategic strategy against a weaker but highly determined Iran and the humongous devastation of both military and civil targets in this region, including those inflicted by Israel in Lebanon, have totally engulfed West Asia in flames. Iran too struck at the GCC nations with which have these US military bases and even their oil infrastructure, oil factories and things like that. And this surprised everyone, including the United States and Israel and the GCC, of course. Now, the flip-flop of the US and Israel combines overall strategic tragedy against a weaker and a determined Iran, and it's caused a huge devastation. Now, Iran's nuclear ambitions, combined with the blockade and then the counter blockade of the strategic waterway, the Strait of Hormuz, by Iran and the US respectively, threatens not only the fast dwindling oil and gas supplies to many nations, but could be, in my view, the final trigger to usher in a global war which the world could do without. Now, let me come to the point as to what would be the most likely, the emerging geopolitical order. Now, there are unmistakable indications that there would be a clear transition from a unipolar world to to a multipolar global order, reducing the dominance of the United States, which is the current, but I'm afraid, the fast fading global superpower. Even if efforts are made by both the US and China combined to make the world bipolar, it will not meet with much success. Anyway, China's unprecedented rise economically and militarily will be a major factor in the coming decades. However, the Chinese too have their myriad challenges, like their humongous dependency on energy imports and search for markets, or in other nations for absorption of their exports, which fuels their economy. Their global and regional ambitions also pose many challenges to them, but the Chinese, I would like to say, are a wise and patient people. Now, nations like Russia, France, Brazil, Japan, India will continually rise along with the European Union and Iran and Turkey. The oil-rich nations in the Gulf and other regions will now pursue independent avenues for their economic rise, shedding the clearly proven ineffective security umbrella of the United States. It will be a major dilution of the US hegemony as we all understand and know about since the last many, many decades. Now, secondly, the policy of nations practicing strategic autonomy and independence in foreign and economic policies will emerge in greater strength rather than they becoming, members of regional power centers across Asia, Africa, uh, Latin America. This will become the norm in the coming years and reshape global influence patterns. Next, there will be, in all likelihood, geopolitical fragmentation between the global north and the global south on issues of trade, technology, and energy governance. However, bilateral and issue-based partnerships replacing long-term ideological blocks are likely also to become the norm. Now, like the ongoing West Asian war, future conflicts will also lead to rising global energy insecurity caused by geopolitical instability and collateral damage to energy producing regions and maritime choke points. In addition, most nations will thus endeavor towards energy diversification, renewables, and building up of larger strategic energy reserves. Importantly, There will be an expansion of asymmetric warfare capabilities, enabling smaller states and non-state actors to challenge major military powers. Integration of artificial intelligence, drones, and other unmanned platforms, cyber systems, quantum technologies, and autonomous weapons into warfare will be expedited. Nations, big and small, will strive for technological sovereignty, especially in semiconductors, telecommunications, cybersecurity, and critical infrastructure. Competition for control over earth minerals, strategic resources, and emerging technologies will only intensify. Powerful nations will now make greater use of economic sanctions, trade restrictions, and financial systems as instruments of geopolitical pressure. Now, regrettably, there will be increased defense spending worldwide, diverting scarce resources away from development, welfare, and global warming priorities. We all know how much of poverty there is in this world, actually. Now, deepening distrust between major powers will lead to reduced global cooperation on climate change, pandemics, and other humanitarian crises as and when they occur. The one point which currently is not being discussed much in the global media, I feel, is that Europe faces challenges of Russia at its doorstep. They have to make a hard choice of breaking away from the United States, that is a NATO without the US, and feel free to engage with Russia and China, or the status quo may continue in case the Americans can, resolve the current problems which the NATO and the Americans have on many issues, including in the West Asian war. Now, let me, in the time left, let me, briefly touch upon or a word about the current and the totally uncalled for West Asian crisis. Now, pertinent to mention here that though for Israel the Iranian long-term nuclear threat is of concern, yet for the United States, this war, according to some, scholars, in reality, is to stem China's rise, and this is in their mind, and Iran is just the battlefield. I leave it to you to judge whether this analysis or prognosis is correct by any such of imagination. In addition, I would like to mention that megalomaniac leaders in the long run take their countries to ruin. And there are enough examples in this world for nations to learn from this uh, cardinal truth. Another point I'd like to mention in this war is that no one in the world perhaps is able to decipher the end objectives of the United States in this war, and or everybody talks about it, and President Trump changes his statements and his strategies every second day, so nobody knows what is the end strategy which they have conceived, the Americans have conceived when they went into war, or is it just prodding by their friends the Israelis. Now, before we specifically, analyze India's likely fortunes in the emerging geopolitical order, let us also summarize the likely contours of the world as they appear today. Some of it I've already mentioned. It may be a bit of a repetition, but importantly, we need to summarize them, how things may appear or shape up in the foreseeable future. Firstly, the era of unilateralism is over for good. And no power, including the US, will have the power or resources to politically or economically or militarily dominate the world. That is quite clear now. The era of bilateralism among nations between each other, that is, will likely to be the order of the day. Multilateralism will also exist through institutions like the United Nations and Security Council, the BRICS, the G7, the G20, the ASEAN, the GCC. But in reality, it'll be more for discussions than being effective on the ground. Now, the just concluded US President's visit to China has clearly brought out the diminishing power of the United States, and ascendancy of China growing in the foreseeable future appears to be very clear. All analysts, or rather, I would say most analysts across the world, agree that President Trump was clearly on the back foot with China during this visit. Nothing concrete on the President Trump's visit to China has come out, whether it was to end the Iranian war or on Taiwan or even on trade. Nothing concrete has really come out. Now, secondly, asymmetric warfare will assume greater importance and in many newer and innovative forms. Even a much smaller nation, militarily speaking, as I had also mentioned earlier, will have the capability to contest a far more militarily powerful nation. From the current scenario, Iran stands as a perfect example of thwarting the combined might of the US and Israel. Thirdly, conventional warfare is already undergoing major changes, and it is of critical importance to study the ongoing kinetic conflicts in the world since the last 5 years or so and adapt them to a nation's peculiar environment. Employment of AI, cyber warfare, data, quantum computing will increase by leaps and bounds. In addition, employment of missiles with large standoff ranges, electronic warfare, air defense systems, precision guided munitions, drones, and other types of unmanned platforms in non contact warfare. In non contact warfare will substantially increase. Importantly, the entire global structure supporting the oil and gas production and its subsequent export to various consumer nations will now undergo a major change as a result of the ongoing kinetic and non-kinetic conflicts as exemplified by the Strait of Hormuz conflict and the ongoing differences between Iran and the US and equally the Gulf cooperation nations. This rather serious problem will require maturity, and a sense of cooperative attitude by the concerned stakeholders. It's indeed a difficult task to be accomplished, though. The current dismal energy or very alarming energy security situation in the world is just the beginning. But the fact remains that to a large extent, both oil exporting and importing nations will now seek independent and newer avenues for energy exports or imports. Now, notwithstanding its emerging global status as a rising power, India appears to have taken, or according to some analysts, given a backseat in diplomatic efforts underway to bring in peace between the US and Israel combined with Iran. Nevertheless, India, with its otherwise friendly relations with Israel, Iran, the Gulf nations, must endeavor working for peace. India's so-called strategic ally, the US under its mercurial President Trump, has not appeared to be conscious of Indian interests since the past year and has been leaning heavily on Pakistan and his favorite Field Marshal, Asim Munir, especially for the current negotiations between the US and Iran. Be that as it may, India does not have to be unnecessarily pliant to the US as it will damage our reputation as one of the leaders of the global South. India has a unique record for being a leader of the non-aligned movement since the mid-50s to adequating multipolarity and practicing strategic autonomy in our larger national interests. Now, global events of the last 5 years have clearly brought forth many lessons for India to adopt for its overall well-being in the coming years. That there is a new geopolitical global order in the offing, as Dr. Aditya also mentioned in his opening remarks, is more than apparent. India must analyze with unforgiving deliberation her interests in the strategic fields of security, economics, industry, technology, agriculture, and the like. Now, the current geopolitical system and the likely stressed economic ecosystem of the future points out vividly to some steps which are imperative for India to adopt in our larger national interests. Now, it is indeed a truism, as we all know, that global crises can spring up without much notice, and nations must prepare themselves for it on a regular basis so as not to be caught napping, and not when you see the fire burning. You have to put in your firefighting arrangements much earlier and then monitor them carefully. Thus, this is not the time to get distracted by short-term problems or self-created internal differences. Accordingly, India must zealously prepare to improve all the constituents of CNP, that is comprehensive national power, with vision and alacrity. Whether it is overall military power adequate to have to face a two-front threat from China and Pakistan individually or combined, and let's hope the third front doesn't come up with Bangladesh or also, you know, Pakistanis and the Chinese flirting with Bangladesh. So we have to be careful. Now, in industrial or energy production and other fields of human endeavor, let's remember that self-reliance and only self-reliance has to be the cardinal pursuit. In the field of diplomacy, India must continue to be far more active than it appears now. To assist in resolving the current West Asian imbroglio, India must reach out to all the stakeholders of this Middle East crisis and seek a broad-based solution which provides security and well-being to most of the Gulf nations, Iran and Israel. And India can explore, I think, cooperation among Russia, Iran, Oman, UAE, European Union, UK, Japan, ROK, that is Republic of Korea, and nations who appear neutral and thus useful to help resolve the current crisis. As the current head of the BRICS, India, in the just finished New Delhi Conference of Foreign Ministers, India has appealed to the global community to cultivate a peaceful solution for the grave crisis saving the world. Though unfortunately, they could not issue a joint declaration or a communique because of problems as far as Iran was concerned, differing versions. So, but nevertheless, India must try. Though President Trump is himself unpredictable, the US ambassador to India, Sergey Gore, can be suitably sounded to adequately inform Washington regards India's views on resolving the Gulf conundrum. India understands that today US is also is an internal crisis of inflation and also has a dipping economy. And I'm afraid the US's gunslinging days are over, and they too will require some time to build up their reserves for other global challenges US may face beyond Iran, which anyway, uh, which the Americans will be wise to remember that Iran is not done and dusted as yet. As of today, the United States Secretary of State Mark Rubio is in India on a 4-day trip, and he's met the Prime Minister, the External Affairs Minister, and all. And I'm sure very important dialogue and would have taken place, and some important points, whether it's trade, energy, security, Iran, China, in particular China also, would have been discussed. India must be firm in the pursuit of its interests. As I mean, we've been following strategic autonomy. We want the best of relations with Russia, the best of relations with America. But if you bend down backwards, then nothing will happen. Now, coming home, come what may, India must adhere, as I had mentioned earlier, to its post-independence values in the pursuit of its foreign policies and measures seeking economic self-reliance to the extent possible. A long-term vision and flexibility in approach is sine qua non for managing the emerging geopolitical order, where multipolarity, independence in a nation's policies will or must transcend traditional alliances and over-dependence on big powers in the years ahead. India must take the lead to be an example for not only the global South, but also the developed world. Finally, I would like to reiterate that the US is getting isolated thanks to the policies of the current US government. And as the Middle East has shown, it is no longer a net security provider for nations who traditionally have been in their fold. Indeed, very challenging times ahead for the world, with war constantly facing it, appears highly probable. And my humble suggestion for my beloved country is to say that history does not wait for nations that hesitate. It rewards those who prepare. It rewards those who prepare. And if India strengthens every pillar of national power while adhering to its tradition of strategic autonomy, our country will not merely adapt to the emerging world order, it will help shape it. I would, in the end, like to end with a quote from a great US president who was genuinely fond of India and its political leadership, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, who famously has stated, and I quote, mankind must put an end to war, or wars will put an end to mankind. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Lieutenant General Kamal Davar, for very detailed and very erudite presentation on the current geopolitical situation and the direction in which it is headed. We are very blessed that we have two foreign policy experts in the audience, and I'm going to request them for their comments. So let me invite Ambassador Suresh Goyal first for his comments on General Davar's presentation. Ambassador Goyal, if you can turn your camera,
Yes.
please.
Thank you very much. I listened to the presentation made by General Kamal Davar very carefully. I'm sorry, I think my mug is not showing properly. Okay. My only concern, he has presented all the facts in absolutely brilliant manner, very realistic analysis of the ground situation. Uh, you know, when we come to basically the current geopolitics of USA, India, and Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor, who lives in Washington, he knows the ground situation much more closely than we who actually only know it through the newspapers and the media. The problem really is that in the present day context, declining power, rising power, and everything is okay. But the declining power is led by a gentleman who seems to have notions of geopolitics which are not even matching which actually don't seem to really even match what the ground reality is or how it runs. For example, I'm only just giving quotations, so just looking at the situation here. For example, he is moving all kinds of equipment and the platforms, Washington, the ships into the states of Hormuz, obviously to keep Iran under control and to keep the states of Hormuz under control, irrespective of the impact it is making on the energy prices. At the same time, he moves USS Nimitz near to Cuba at the same time to attempt keeping Cuba under his thumb. At the same time, the situation in USA seems to be practically getting out of hand, both in terms of unemployment, in terms of the inflation, in terms of the growth. Therefore, it's not a question. I'm just making a comment here, Dr. Adityanji and Lieutenant General Kamal Davar. Unfortunately, we have come to a passe here where the rising power, instead of being deterred by the declining power, is actually being aided, is actually being helped in meeting their objectives. And second thing, from the Indian point of view, the unfortunate fact is that the rising power, India has had several differences with the rising power. And we do not know at this stage at all how we are going to meet with the challenge of this rising power in case the declining power does not meet its security obligations. India Pacific is an example. I mean, we all know that. Quad meeting is going to be taking place in Delhi on the 24th or 26th, whatever the date. But President Trump doesn't seem to have any focus on the security in the Pacific. He has cancelled the supply of arms to Taiwan today. South China Seas, Malacca States, ASEAN. Where is the American guarantees of security to South Korea or Japan? So I'm I'm basically sounding a rather pessimistic note. And if India has to play a role, I'm afraid, given the huge asymmetry in the CNP of India, China, I don't know whether we can or we should not focus on our own group and development. And even that is proving to be a problem because of the energy factors. So on the whole, I see very dark period really ahead of us. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Say something?
Thank you, Ambassador Goel, for your comments. They are very, very important comments. I'm going to invite Ambassador Kapoor now to give his, viewpoints on General Davar's presentation as well as Ambassador Goel's comments. Ambassador Kapoor, please.
I am just finishing another call. I'll join back in a minute.
Okay.
Can I, Dr. Adityanji, can I say just a point from my side also, please? Another point?
Sure. Meanwhile, yes, you can have the floor, please.
Yeah. You know, we are also having this Quad conference in Delhi. Quad, US, Japan, Australia, and India. Now, the point is, this was meant for, stability and international based rules order in the Asia Pacific or the Indo Pacific and all. Now, the US, Japan, Australia, and India. But the point is, it's not a formal defense group. Now, but a point which we're all talking about or worries us or concerns us is that how relevant is it today? Because it has not made any progress at all since it was established 5 years back. And now, with the American president's visit to China, is he going to sort of play down the importance of the Quad? And he's also the AUKUS, which is, as you know, is the defense grouping of Australia, UK, and US. So this is one aspect also we must bear in mind, that where is the Quad going forward? What is it? What is the ultimate aim of Quad? Is it relevant or not relevant today? I just wanted to mention this point.
Okay. And perfect timing. We have Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor here. So, Ambassador Kapoor, let's have your comments and then we'll have a little bit of discussion.
Thank you so much, Dr. Adityanji, for carrying on this outstanding work forward. And General Davar, very good insights, very good analysis. Thank you for that. What I would like to know is the following. Firstly, in the Hamas Charter, for example, they say that Israel does not have a right to exist and we will sort of eliminate all Jews. Similarly, the Iranian statement is very clear. They don't recognize the existence of Israel and they say we will wipe it off the face of the earth. So in all these negotiations going on and all the discussions, why can't they make it the primary starting point? Because once you remove this, written and well articulated and oft repeated statement and threat to the very existence of Israel, any negotiations should start with the first statement that Iran and all its proxies and all its allies and all the terror group that it is financing and supporting renounce this existential threat to Israel, and Israel has a right to exist and Jews have a right to life. So that is one point. And about Quad, I was the person who probably wrote the first concept note for the Quad in 2003. Then it was taken up by the Japanese and the Americans and the others, and 2005 the Japanese Prime Minister wrote to the others to bring it into existence. But that was based on the concept note which I had inked on paper. So I personally have naturally a lot of emotional attachment to that, because my concept was more on the security side. Because going ahead with the strategic, planning which China was doing for the decades ahead, which I could see very close quarters in Cambodia, where I was ambassador at that time, I felt that it would not be possible for America, for example, to meet the emerging threats from China by itself in the years ahead, neither for any other single power, neither for India. So I felt that some combination of forces and alignments and syncing together and interoperability would definitely be required. And slowly, and India was a country which opposed it initially, partially, I guess, because some of the people in the decision-making structure in India at that time were more aligned towards China, with the party that was in power at that time, and with the NSA also in power, who had earlier been ambassador in China. So they were not very keen to give oxygen to this. The earlier foreign secretary had been very keen to get it into existence as a very powerful grouping, but then it sort of fell by the wayside, primarily because of India. So I think it has a great future, because that is going to be a continuing threat for the world. China, internally and externally, we can see as a lot of sort of dissonance, with all the neighboring countries and with a large number of its ethnic minorities in all the sites. And if you talk about Tibet, if you talk about Xinjiang, if you talk about Hong Kong, if you talk about Mongolia, so any of those provinces, there is always simmering discontent. They have controlled it because of the demographic change which they have affected through the Han population, etc. But it's not something which has gone away, and you cannot wish it away. And maybe we may not have done the right thing by handing them the three treaties which were endowed to us by the British on postal trade and telecommunication power responsibility in Tibet in 1955. Because after that, the Tibet uprising and Dalai Lama fleeing and all that happened. But considering the current geopolitical situation, with all their neighbors also overlapping territorial claims, I don't think it's going to be very successful as a country in the future, because economically it's not in the best of shapes. Growing population, over use or overbuilding of infrastructure, railways, not being very financially successful, etc. Lots of stories there. But in spite of all that, it is still going to be a major threat perception for India, for US, and for the world. Besides the Sharia part, the political jihad, the Islamic jihad part of it. So what are your thoughts on these two aspects, General? If you want, I can repeat them, but I'll leave it to you.
Thank you, Ambassador Kapoor. We will bring General Dawa back again. I had seen in between that Lieutenant Colonel Channon had raised his hand and then he lowered his hand. So I want to bring Lieutenant Channon, whatever he had comments, to come over and share with us.
Good evening to all the distinguished panelists and, of course, General Daur, who gave a phenomenal talk on the geopolitical situation. I just wanted to make a couple of observations. We have to understand that while China and the US may be predominant militarily, there is always a scarcity of resources. There are multiple flashpoints, which the Americans too definitely are trying to attempt. And they know very well that Iran is not Iraq. So you cannot be repeating that flashbang, shock and awe, and win over whatever you want to on the ground objectives in Iran. Coming to China, I think China has got 22 neighbors. All these neighbors are not very, they don't have very good experiences with the, Chinese people. We also don't have a very nice relationship, but in our continuous engagement since 2020, it's been observed that the foreign ministers have been stating quite often that let the boundary issue be kept on the back channel or on the, in the remote while we focus on the economic development.
Back
So I
burner.
just wanted to add these two comments to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel Channan. I would like to bring General Dower now back to respond to these comments by Lieutenant Colonel Channan as well as by Ambassador Kapoor. General Dower, please.
Yeah, thank you. As far as the Quad is concerned, as I had mentioned, why I'm asking this question is how is it relevant today? The fact remains that America in the Quad is the most dominant partner, between Japan, Australia, us, and the US. Naturally, the US, both economically and militarily, is the major power. Now, why are we not then? And we also know that with the Chinese, though we want to be friends with them, we want to be in competition and not in confrontation with the Chinese. Absolutely agreed. But the fact is, why we have not taken a conscious decision in the government or among all our, brilliant analysts and things like that, that let's pursue the Quad to do what it was intended to be, it was intended to be. We can also make this into be a bit of a defense grouping also. But even economically, if four of us, that is the US, Japan, Australia and India get together and give some teeth to the Quad, it will be in the interest of the of all the four countries, including us. So let's come to a consensus and push ahead. But unfortunately, I don't see anybody pushing ahead. Neither the Americans, neither the Indians, and it has just become a talking point, and that's about all. When you conceive of something, then let's please push ahead and do something concrete on the ground, you know. So I agree with our Ambassador Kapoor's point also totally, but we have to move ahead with it. Now, as far as the other pointers is concerned, AUKUS also, which is supposed to be a military grouping, trilateral military grouping, they're also just, quiet and they're doing nothing about it. So I only hope it's not the Americans who are now, facing the heat, feeling that, look, our resources are not being put to good use, and they've had some bad examples of the Iran war, and now they also shy that they will not even give teeth to the AUKUS, which is essentially a defense grouping, trilateral defense grouping. So I'm afraid this has to be decided between the powers, between America, India, and Japan, Australia, UK, and all that. That what do we do? We have to get some clarity of a future vision. So I'm afraid which is not there at the moment. That's all I wanted to say.
Ambassador Goel wanted to say something. He raised his hand.
Yeah.
Ambassador Goel, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aditya, Chair. I just want to respond very briefly to the point made about China in the region by Lieutenant Colonel Charan. You see, since I follow China regularly and I speak the Chinese, what I would say, and I do hope that when I say these things, they are under the Chatham House rules. Unfortunately, what our policy with China in terms of rapprochement or in terms of negotiations on boundary or in terms of post Rajiv Gandhi's visit to China 1988, I've been rather hesitant without clarity on what we actually want from China from time to time. China, on the other hand, has been absolutely focused and determined. They knew exactly what they wanted, and they played the USA in terms of both acquisition of technology. Unfairly, fairly is not the issue here. And they did that. They acquired the technology through theft, but they did. They use their market size and they use their population to develop technology. That is where China is today in artificial intelligence. So, in the sense of approach, China has been more determined in terms of being numero uno, being number one. and they've done it very well, really. We, in 1991, as we opened, and before that, when we, in 1988, the visit, I know China was so hugely dependent for science and technology on other countries. We used to be the senior partner in S&T transfer than China was at that time. I'm talking 1988. I remember in 1988, the issue of pharmaceuticals and the active pharmaceutical ingredients, APIs. India was on the top. But it's our industry who chose to parcel out APIs to China, thinking that they will do more upmarket value addition. And we shifted the entire APIs to China with the result that when it came to the crunch, China used the handle to put us under pressure. China has played both the supply chain and the resources chain. I'm saying this out of a bit of an admiration, to be very honest, because in this jungle of the real power politics, there is no morality or there is no ethics here at all. The only issue is how do you gain power, and we did. As far as Lieutenant Colonel Chanan's question of the Chinese neighborhood not being very receptive to China, true. But whether they're receptive or not, they have no options. The same thing in Africa, same thing in Southeast Asia, same thing in Latin America. They have no options. Why is it so that in ASEAN, there is no code of conduct even till today? Why is it that USA is not able to use that kind of anguish or the feeling against China in Southeast Asia? Therefore, all I want to put is that the points made by Lieutenant Charan are all very good. But the point is that China has used very admirably the market size, their resource availability, the resource resilience, and supply chain resilience. The recent example of the critical minerals, I don't need to really go into detail. Therefore, we need to think slightly more deftly and more cleverly on our strategy vis-a-vis China. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Ambassador Goyal. Ambassador Kapoor has raised his hand. Ambassador Kapoor, kindly make your points.
Thank you very much. First of all, what I'd like to say is that we also have to think as to, the compulsions of making the Quad a viable entity and a good grouping and a thriving grouping. Because when I look at it from the Indian perspective, of course, everybody knows that, and the Indian viewpoints on America and, more collaboration with America, etc. When I look at it from the Washington perspective, based here in Washington, D.C., then what also comes to view or perspective is that, for example, when US offers partnership to India of NATO in the format of NATO +6, India, and even if it is passed by the Congress, which it was passed by the Congress here, so it had become very easy for them to sort of move ahead. They didn't even delay that matter. They just moved ahead very fast, and then they were open to negotiations once the framework was approved. Now, what we did was we said we are not interested. Now, in the case that, in my view, what would have been a better option for India would have been to say that we are not interested in NATO +6. Let the NATO +5 continue. But we are very happy to engage with NATO as NATO plus India, like we have ASEAN-India Summit Dialogue. So a separate parallel track, like we ASEAN +3. So initially the proposal was which China was pushing very hard because China, Korea, Japan are ASEAN +3. So China kept on insisting that it should be ASEAN +4. China, Japan, Korea, India. We put our foot down. We said we are not going to be ASEAN +4. We will be ASEAN India, separate, ASEAN +1. So they agreed. And finally, it's a very successful template, ASEAN plus India, ASEAN India summits, ASEAN India, all collaborations, etc., projects, everything. So similarly, if NATO, instead of shooting it down completely, we had said, okay, we want to have a engagement, but on a separate platform, independent, NATO plus India, it would have been of great benefit to India. It would have been of great benefit to NATO. And that would also have, like Biden was pushing very hard on the Quad when he was president, and we were playing a little coy, a little slow. So alternately, and now Trump initially, when he was at the swearing in ceremony, when he was sworn in, at that stage, the first Quad meeting was held by Marco Rubio and the other three foreign ministers in the White House here in National NSA's office. So, and if we have some impetus, suddenly we do certain things which may not be related, which disengages America from total active concentration of focus or interest. So that is also another thing which happens very frequently between nations and between US India more particularly. So how do we forge ahead with the Quad in a way that it becomes impervious to the people who are in power at that particular point of time, or less relevant or less dependent, so that at least the frameworks are in place, the collaborations are in place, and everything is moving ahead, and it's only a matter of tweaking a little bit more or a little bit less at the top. That can happen. So those sort of things we have to think through. And again, for us to revive this NATO plus India will not be difficult at all, because it's already approved by the Congress here. So those are some decisions which we have to take very seriously, considering the way the world is moving ahead and considering the threats which the world is facing. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Kapoor. Thank you, Ambassador Goyal. Thank you very much indeed, Lieutenant Colonel Channon. We are very thankful to our esteemed, distinguished speaker today, Lieutenant General Kamal Davar. As the moderator of this session, I use my editorial discretion to make some stray last-minute comments that may or may not have been touched. General Davar mentioned that we are going towards multipolarity, which is probably going to be the theme in President Trump's China visit. Mention was made of Thucydides' trap, and that was a very blunt way of telling the reigning hyperpower that the rising hyperpower is willing to take over the management of the geopolitical scenario in the entire world. That is China's message to the entire world. What we have not focused on, the reiteration of Monroe Doctrine as Donroe Doctrine, that Western Hemisphere is the backyard of United States of America, and the ambition is to increase the territory of United States by taking Canada as 51st state. If not Canada, then Venezuela as 51st state, having Cuba as de facto part of the United States of America, using the power of displaced or self-exiled Cuban Americans who came from Cuba during the communist years. We have not talked about United States territorial acquisition or ambitions to acquire independent or semi-independent countries like Greenland and Iceland. Renaming of Gulf of Mexico as Gulf of America, and possibly being the resident power in the Strait of Hormuz. These are very serious issues, although there is a declining superpower, but that declining superpower is planning to use its might more in the Western Hemisphere for more strategic depth. And that is a new venture. So the world has to keep that in mind, that entire resources of the Western Hemisphere are going to be controlled by one country. And that's a new scenario that we need to keep in mind. We did talk about China and its issues. Things are somewhat in flux. China may be a rising power, but also it's simultaneously a declining power, as Ambassador Goyal had said. The demographic trends and other issues are significantly there. So we shall see what happens. Historically, we could have done a lot of things, should have done a lot of things. That is all the water under the bridge. We have to focus on future. Various groupings are made, whether they are military alliances or strategic groupings. Nobody talks about CATO anymore, and nobody sheds tears about CENTO anymore. So if AUKUS does not survive, and it's not going to survive, that's written on the wall. Similarly, Quad, we are beating a dead horse. And yes, there was initial reluctance from India, the then dispensation, but actually the person who killed the Quad 1.0 was not India, or I can take the name Manmohan Singh or Shiv Shankar Menon, but it was Kevin Rudd. Kevin Rudd actually put the death nails in the coffin of Quad 1.0. And Quad actually, as it is currently, has no future at all as a military alliance, as a security alliance, or anything like that. Quad, from United States perspective, has already been replaced by a Squad, which has all the other three members are the same, but the fourth member is Philippines because India insists on strategic autonomy. So I would not shed actually tears about the Quad. Bottom line is that in this new geopolitical situation where there are no laws, every country has to focus on their comprehensive national power, which General Dower did mention. These security minilaterals or military alliances are transient and ephemeral. And if we put too much of faith in these, it would be foolish. It'll be myopic. You have permanent interests, not permanent friends. So with those comments, I will end this discussion. My heartfelt thanks to General Dower for, very detailed lecture. This was his first time on our platform, and we hope that he'll continue to visit on this platform. We had very good discussion. So thanks to all the participants in discussion. Thanks to all the audience members. And thanks to Team CSA, Mr. Rajiv Verma, Mr. Ankush Pandari, Mr. Ripudaman Pachori. These are the people who work behind the scenes and allow us to hold these kind of meetings. So my heartful thanks to all three of them. Actually, Ankush is here present. He did put a question, but I think that question has already been sort of answered indirectly. But in the end, my heartfelt thanks to General Lieutenant Kamal Davar, and we hope that he will continue to grace our platform, and we would be willing to publish a narrative of his speech today on the CSA website. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Ji. Thank you very much. I'm deeply honored to be in this great company and learn a few things of diplomacy and what the world is undergoing. All I would say finally is that America must not, act as an imperial power. That's all.
Thank you, General Davar. We are going to end this
Thank you
meeting.
very much.
Okay.
Honored.